Welcome back, everyone. This is the Victory Podcast, and I'm your host, Steve McGrath. This week, I'm pleased to bring you my conversation with Gerome Sapp. Now, Jerome graduated out of Notre Dame, spent 4 years there after being one of the top recruits in the country as a high school athlete. He had a 5-year career in the NFL between the Ravens and the Colts, and after he retired, he had multiple successful business ventures, but today he concentrates most of his time to be a good father to his kids and also working with the nonprofit Merging Vets and Players. So Jerome took the time to talk about all this, but before we get to that conversation, I have to let you know that we are brought to you by Team Builder. Team Builder provides strength and conditioning software to more than 500 high school football programs nationwide, as well as the NFL. So whether you write your own program, have a full-time strength coach, or you need training programs, Team Builder can make your weight room more efficient, more accountable, and smarter when it comes to measuring your team's progress. Right now, Team Builder is offering a free 10-week spread offense tempo training program when you start a 14-day free trial at teambuilder.com using the promo code VICTORY. So without any further ado, here's our conversation with Gerome Sapp. Two, one. Ladies and gentlemen, Gerome Sapp is in the house. Jerome, how are you doing today, man?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. We've had some great back and forth trying to get this thing scheduled. In the meantime, I've thoroughly enjoyed your social media. Great mix of some comedy, some motivation, and the coolest part of all, man, you are posting stuff about your kids all the time, every day. They're probably more athletic now than I ever was at any point in my life. What's it been like for you just trying to get to they're playing every sport I've ever seen. What's it been like for you trying to, keep, them getting to every event that they need to get to?
The funny thing is that's the hardest part is managing time and schedules. But, I tell them all the time that's if you ever want to do anything significant in life, you're going to have to learn time management skills. So, they kind of help with it too, and the biggest thing is I don't force really any sport on them. I tell them, what do you want to do today? Or what do you want to do this season? And my only request is that you finish what you started. So, a lot of my friends are like, are you gonna put them in football or this or that? I'm like, nah, I mean, if they want to play, I'd rather them not play. But to your point, it is hard juggling a lot of the time restraints around that, though. Sports.
Oh, I can imagine. But can you just talk to me about what I can imagine is such a proud dad moment when you see, is one of your sons the fastest child on the world record holder now?
Yeah, he is. My youngest son, Kai, he just broke a world record for the 5-year-old group, which is the youngest age that they start tracking 100-meter dash times. So he just broke the world record for the fastest 100-meter dash time 5-year-olds ever ran. So it was actually a 15.93. He's actually the first 5-year-old to ever break or go sub 16. So that was a super proud moment because he was actually competing against 8-year-olds when he did it. And he ended up taking second in the race, but ended up breaking the world record for a 5-year-old while he did it. So super proud, I mean, for these kids, I mean, they work so hard, and then I let them be kids so hard too, Fortnite and all that kind of stuff. But to see them go out there and compete and give it their all, I mean, that's all a parent can really ask for, is that you give it your all and you don't quit. And so in that regard, I'm super, super proud.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'd imagine so. And I can only imagine the big things coming for them as they get older and they decide to, pick what sports they really want to get into. And, I'm sure we'll see
Absolutely.
that Sapp name. If it's not on Sundays, it'll be, in some professional league. But,
Yeah.
I just wanted to take it back now to when you were a kid, and maybe not necessarily 5, but I had read that from age 11, you knew that you wanted to go and play in the NFL. Can
Yep.
you just take me back to when you were like 16, 17, 18? You're playing Lamar High School, so you're in Texas, which is obviously a big football state. What was it like for you navigating that recruiting process, getting yourself to a point where you could even stand out amongst your peers? And ultimately, what's that road to Notre Dame look like?
Man, that's very interesting. There's a quote that says that people looking to be successful never find it. It typically happens to those just looking to work. Success comes usually to those who are too busy working. Um, And I had a conversation with a parent maybe 2 weeks ago about what they needed to do for their child to be successful in sports. And I said, the biggest thing is make sure they're having fun, because when you're having fun, pressure seems to be eliminated for the most part. So to answer your question, as a 16, 17-year-old, I mean, I remember being good at football, but also remember having so many other interests. I wasn't so focused on football where it was beating me down, I mean, and I was fortunate. I got to play with a lot of my good friends and my best friend who actually got drafted 2 spots ahead of me or something like that. So I was too busy having fun in high school and with my teammates on the football field to really understand the magnitude of what my play on the field was affording me or will eventually afford me. I think when I was 16, whenever I was a sophomore, I was starting on varsity, and I didn't realize the magnitude of that because I was having fun. I was playing with my brother too, and ended up making, I think, first team All State as a sophomore, and led the district in tackles. I was a district MVP, but I had no clue about any of that. To be honest with you, I had no clue. I remember vividly my coach coming to me saying, "Hey, do you know who was the district MVP?" And I'm like a dummy, I don't know. He's like, you know who led the district in tackles? Me. So to be honest with you, it all happened so fast, and I was having so much fun as a high school kid, in Texas, playing against the best competition, that it was also fun to me. Competing was fun to me, and we didn't win every game. We won a lot of games, but it just, I just don't remember the pressure. So when college scouts start coming around and college coaches, I guess college coaches, not scouts, it was just a fun process. I mean, my mother always kept me grounded. I always, to be honest with you, I never thought I was as good as I really was, basically. And I think that was the key too. I always thought I could get better, and I was always trying to get better. So I was always focused on, man, how can I play this game better, or how can I do better next time, type thing. So, and I always I always did well in school as well. So 16, 17 years old, I mean, I had every college in the country starting to recruit me from Harvard to USC, so I just enjoyed the ride, because I was also running track in the off season too. So I remember coming home from track practice and there would be lines of cars lined up down the street with all these famous head coaches that I've only seen on TV, from Bobby Bowden to, I forget the coach at the time that was at USC. I mean, it was incredible, but I was just grounded. It was fun to me. It was a game to me. I knew that football wasn't everything to me. It was just a stepping stone for me into college, and then from that, I could choose to make that a stepping stone into the NFL if I worked hard enough, or I could do whatever I wanted academically, and that was my mindset, and that was kind of what was instilled in me from my mother, from a young age. So I think the thing that made it easier for me was there was no pressure. It was all fun. It was all football was, I don't want to say a hobby, but it was a glorified hobby because I also had track scholarships and I had academic scholarships, so that's what it was. But to the initial question you asked me, if I remember correctly, by the time I was 11, 12, I knew I wanted to play in the NFL. Um, and I think what made it easier for me is I had a brother who was 13 months older than me, and we were basically each other's rabbit. We pushed each other. I mean, I remember doing burnout push-ups to death. Basically, we take turns and sit-ups when we were 11, 12 years old. I mean, and I remember thinking back now on it. I mean, what better training partner could you have as another driven person who was your flesh and blood and only 13 months older than you too, and you got to play with him on varsity as well. So it was also fun. I mean, I ended up being the number one high school player in the state of Texas and the number one safety in the country, and I think the number four player in the country. But if you ask me, I was just a kid from Texas trying to get better, basically, because my world was so shielded from a lot of that, and even back then we didn't have, I mean, we had internet, but we didn't have the online. I think my year was the first year we had, I think it was RivalNet, rivals.com, basically. It was the first year recruiting went online. But we weren't really playing surfing the internet type thing. So it was really a lot of magazines. It wasn't that online, which I think is great now. So I was kind of shielded in a bubble a little bit from all of what a lot of the high school recruits have to go through now.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what a great perspective too, to be able to do that and you not have the pressure, as you said. But ultimately,
Yep.
with everything on the table, you picked Notre Dame. And I mean, considering everything you just said, it's one of the most prestigious schools. I can absolutely
Yep.
understand why you would go there. But what was it about Notre Dame? Was it just the lore and the history? How did you pick them over everyone?
That's a good question, man. I had visits lined up to University of Texas. I took that visit. Had Miami, Michigan, USC. I think I had one more. But it was something about the mixture of academics, athletics, and tradition for Notre Dame that I just couldn't say no to. And I think a lot of people have that experience that go to Notre Dame because in fact Notre Dame was my worst visit, and it's most people's worst visit because the big recruiting weekend is in December, I believe, or January. So at Notre Dame, it's 2 degrees and it's 4 feet of snow everywhere, and I'm coming from sunny Houston, Texas, with all these Southern girls, and we go up to Notre Dame, and all the girls are wrapped up in scarves, and you don't even see anything, and but you realize it was something more about Notre Dame that drew you to them, and that made your soul feel right because you knew it was nothing else that was making you go there but a sense of this is where I belong for some reason type thing. It wasn't the social life, it wasn't anything else, but something is drawing me to this school, and I can't deny it. So that was really what it was, and to be honest with you, it was everything that I thought it should be. It was a little harder than I imagined it being, but I think it being harder, made us accountable, made me more accountable as a man when I graduated because they didn't let anything slide at Notre Dame. We had to go to class. You know, we didn't have athletic dorms. We didn't have training table, which made us intermingle with the student body, which was one of the best things that could have ever happened in terms of befriending just students, and living with just students that had a totally different perspective of life and the college experience. And even after college, being good friends with a lot of these guys still to this day, I think that really broadened the horizon of what college and what social life and what being a student athlete is really all about.
Yeah, that's awesome. And to get that, so many programs, I'd imagine you miss that as a student athlete, because you're just
Yep.
with your guys, your teams all the time. But
Yep.
you know, you get to Notre Dame, they're coming off a bit. I think they, number 22, they go 9-3. Looks like the
Yep.
program's heading in the right direction. Freshman year though, down to 5-7. Sophomore
Yep.
year up to 9-3 again. Next
Yep.
year down to 5-6. What's it like for you? Now, not that you would have questioned Notre Dame or anything, but if you're really saying, you know what, can I get to the next level, and my team's kind of yo-yoing,
Yep.
how do you sort of mentally, I'm about to get to Tyrone Willingham coming in, new head coach your senior year, but just before he even comes in, what's the feeling in the locker room? Just being like, what's going on here? Like this program never loses, and we just had two,
Yep.
sub 500 teams.
That is an awesome question. No one's ever asked me that, and to be honest with you, it was hard. It was tough. You know, being recruited by all these programs around the country, knowing you could have went anywhere, and selfishly knowing you could have played at a lot of these places, but being at Notre Dame where they didn't play young people right away most of the time. Well, significantly. I mean, I played as a freshman, but significantly. University of Texas, they start a lot of their freshman DBs, which is why they're DB University. Them in Miami, and that makes a huge difference for guys. Just throw them in there. They're gonna make mistakes, and then they're gonna get better. And then they're gonna get a lot better. And then by the time they're juniors and seniors, they're all Americans. And they're, but Notre Dame was different. Bob Davie was under so much pressure that he didn't want to risk putting young guys out there with any significant time out of fear that they would mess up and essentially they would lose games, which in the end, we did lose a lot of games. Um, so you not only had a hard school, like we had to get up at 5 a.m. for workouts. After workouts, you had to go to breakfast and they monitored what you ate at breakfast. Then you went back to film study, all this before class, you know. Then you had class all day. Then you had practice. Then they made you go to study hall until your GPA was above a 3.5. So you didn't get done till about 11:30 at night, you know, after starting at 5 a.m. So that was tough. One, because, and I'll go through the whole progression. But football, you know, most high schools don't study film that much. I know we didn't. We just went out and played, you know, which is kind of crazy. But my high school did have 9 D1 scholarships my senior year. But for the first time, football was your life, you know, and school was your life, and working out was your life. Also, we're losing. You're not playing. So it takes most people 2 years to really understand the magnitude of Notre Dame, the University of Notre Dame. And that magnitude is this university has been here way before you got there and it'll be there way before you leave. So you have to make a decision on how you want to make your impact on this university and when you're going to decide to make your impact. And usually that realization, if I remember correctly, happened around my end of my sophomore year, basically. And then I made a decision like, man, this is tough, but this is why I came here. I could have stayed at University of Texas, which was a great program with Mac Brown, and all my friends went there. All the guys I competed against in Texas went there. That we all knew each other. But I told myself I wanted a challenge, and this is why I went to South Bend, Indiana, and it started to change a little bit. Once your mindset changes and your attitude around that changes, everything else changes a little bit. So though it was tough, though we were losing, you know, we made a point to say, listen, we came here for a reason and let's finish it. Let's finish our class. Let's finish it strong, basically. So we had one more year of Bob Davie, and that was, I think, a 5-7 season or something like that, my junior year. And it was bad. It was tough. I mean, it was, you know, and now that I'm an adult, I can understand more a lot of the pressures that all the coaching staff were under. And if you're, I don't know if you remember, but Urban Myers was one of my coaches my first 2 years at University of Notre Dame. Um, and he was hard too, but he was really good. He was really good though. You know, he taught me a lot. And then we actually get George O'Leary when Bob Davie was fired. We hired George O'Leary, I think, for 3 days, and then that didn't work out. And then they brought Tyrone Willingham in, and I just remember for the first time being in like a free fall in my young adult life. Like we didn't have a coach, we didn't really have workouts to go through. Like we were just kind of living like rogue lives, you know. Like, and then Coach Willingham came in and was just like, "Listen, guys, you know, I recruited every single one of you guys to go to Stanford because he was just coming from Stanford, and he said all of you have the ability. You just need someone to believe in you. You just because I know you believe in yourselves, but that's only half of it. You know, you need to someone of authority to believe in you as well." And he said, "I believe in every one of you because I recruited all of you. So we're just gonna simplify things and we're just gonna play fast. You guys have the ability, probably more ability than any program in this country. You just need the confidence and the ability to play fast and make mistakes and it be okay." And that's what it was. You know, Coach Willingham came in and he took our senior class and the fifth year class, and we won 10 games that year. We probably should have won 11 games and gone to the Orange Bowl, but we ended up losing a fluke game to BC where we had 7 turnovers, one that resulted in the score, and we lost 14-7. Then we lost to USC the last game of the season. But, you know, it was tough, but it taught you that if you just hang in there, you know, and I know that's cliche, but it taught us that if you just hang in there and keep going, you know, sometimes you got to tuck your head and just push through it, and just let that light inside of you light the way for you. Because sometimes there's times in football, there's times in life where you don't see a light at the end of the tunnel, but something inside you is telling you you're going the right way, even though no one else can see it. And sometimes you can't see it, but there's a little light inside of all of us. You got to listen to it, and like I just said, tuck your head and just keep going, and eventually you'll find what you're looking for. And I think that that kind of summed up. That was like a microcosm of my senior year at Notre Dame, and it was fun. For the first time in a long time, football was fun again, and Coach Tyrone Willingham was a huge part of that, actually.
That's so cool. And coming off that big senior season, you now have the chance to go pro, and you get drafted by
Yep.
the Ravens. So, can you just walk me through now the next leap that you have to go through? Now you're a professional. You're earning money to play football. Football is now your life. There's no academics other than learning the playbook in your position. How do you sort
Yep.
of now mentally, kick it up another level because you now have to adjust to, A, relocating to Baltimore, B, getting to know Brian Billick and his staff, and then you're no longer playing with, guys, young men your age. You're now playing with grown men.
Yeah.
You're coming off, you're going to join a team that won a Super Bowl just a couple years prior. So, I mean, you're talking, you have a young Ray Lewis, McAllister, Boulware, young Terrell Suggs, young Ed Reed. What was that like for you,
Yeah.
just acclimating to all these different things?
Well, it's funny. Suggs and I got drafted together. I mean, obviously he was in the first round, but to your point, he was a young Terrell Suggs at the time. Man, the one thing I could say is you just wanted to compete. None of that mattered to me. You know, when I got drafted, that was my opportunity to now compete at the next level. And the best athletes, I don't care what sport, what gender, they just want to compete. And it doesn't matter who you put in front of them or what the conditions are around them. If you give them an opportunity to get on the field and compete to the fullest, they know something inside them knows that they're going to be okay. And that was me. I mean, I was coming in and, I shattered my wrist the last game against USC my senior year, and I didn't know I shattered it. So I played in the bowl game and the Senior Bowl game, and ended up having surgery on my wrist. And teams didn't think I'd be able to play my rookie year. So I remember slipping in the draft because teams actually didn't necessarily think I would ever recover because of the injury that I had to my wrist and the bone that I injured. So I remember coming in with a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, wanting to prove all these teams wrong and also prove the Ravens right for drafting me. And so when I walked in, it was a little bit intimidating because you read about all these guys and you see highlights about Ray Lewis. I remember the first time I met Ray Lewis, and it was a shock to the soul how calm and cordial he was, and not that I assumed that he wasn't calm and cordial, but he was so different than he was on the field, and the interviews you saw and the clips of him on the field, and I remember Chris McAllister was so different than I ever thought he was. He was like one of my boys back home in the hood type thing. Um, but you also realize in a professional football locker room, there's everyone's different. You got guys from all different walks of life, but the one common denominator is everyone wants to compete and everyone wants to win. And that was my how can you put it? That was the common denominator that made me comfortable, basically. You know, Even though you're never really comfortable because it's a professional sport, especially in football. There's no guaranteed contracts. You don't know if you're gonna make the team. You don't know if you're gonna stay on the team. But I felt like I was home because I can compete with these great athletes, and they wanted the same thing that I wanted, and it was just a matter of going to get it, basically. So making that transition from college to pro, it was love. I mean, I loved it. I love not having any other more responsibilities than studying football and cracking heads, basically. And I was so fortunate to play on that defense, on that team with all those veterans that 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 weren't just veterans, but they taught you though, because our motto was you're only as strong as your weakest link. So I don't care if it's a rookie, if you're backup, everyone, let's help people, because everyone's gonna have to play. And that was the other thing too. Even if you're a backup, you have to prepare as if you're the starter every week. And that taught me how to be a professional. Even if you knew you weren't going to play, you know, you you had to take the same test that the starters took the night before the game to even suit up, and yeah, we took tests to make sure we knew what we were doing before the game. But that taught me how to be a professional. Ed Reed, that was his second year at the time, and I remember him being so wise beyond his years, and obviously Ray Lewis. You mentioned Peter Boulware. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Um, it was an amazing experience for me. It was football, 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 study, study, study. Let's let's grow to see how pure of professionals we can be, and that was my rookie year.
Got it. That's awesome. So you only played 1 year in Baltimore before you ultimately signed with Indy for 2 years. So just a couple things there. How does your time in Baltimore come to an end? How do they let you know why Indy, and then how do you now sort of reset a little bit and now get used to Coach Dungy and how they do everything in Indy and their terminology and all that stuff? Like, it was
Sure.
just, what's that whirlwind?
Man, it's one of the hardest thing a young professional athlete can take is to be released from a team, because you haven't yet understood that it's not personal, it's business, and you haven't yet understood that it's nothing you necessarily did. It's just the business of the game. So it actually, them releasing me actually split the organization in two sides, because essentially what happened was, you remember when Deion Sanders came to play for the Ravens?
Yep.
So my backup, Corey Fuller, was who went to Florida State, was really good friends with Deion Sanders. So Brian Billick made a side deal with Corey Fuller and said, "Hey, if you can get Deion to come play with the Ravens, I'll guarantee you 2 years on the team." Even though he was my backup, they drafted me to play with Ed Reed. So all the scouts, the GMs are like, "Wait a minute. Oh, so we had injuries on the O line and D line, so we needed to cut someone." They ended up bringing Dion in, which was awesome. I got to play with Dion for, I think, 3 or 4 weeks, including preseason. But then we had injuries going into week 2, and they needed to release one of the DBs, because that's just how it works with injuries on the team. And you usually go to the position group that has the most players, and you release the odd man out, which should have been Corey Fuller. But because Brian Billick made that deal with him under the table, he stayed. And Brian Billick overruled everyone. So they released me thinking it would only be for a week, and then I'd clear waivers, and then they'll sign me back. Not, they didn't realize that because of my wrist, a lot of teams, basically the Ravens got me because of my wrist. I would have been taken a lot earlier. And it turned out that the Colts wanted to draft me in the second round, but they didn't think I'd be able to play. So once I cleared waivers, the Colts were like, "Wait a minute, we got a chance to get this guy." So I remember vividly, Tony Dungy calling me. He called me personally. It was like, "Hey, we missed you in the draft. We wanted to take you way earlier. The Ravens ended up getting you. But just to show you how much we want you, they gave me a signing bonus as a cut athlete. Like, they didn't even have to give me a signing bonus, but they gave me a signing bonus to come play for them, and I was released. I was, so that day I was cut. I was signed with the Colts later on that night, and I remember Coach Dungy telling me, "One man's trash is another man's treasure, and don't let this get to you. This is just a game of football, the business of football." And later on that night, I was on a plane to Indianapolis. So before I get to my time in Indianapolis, I want to go back to the question you asked me, if I remember correctly. How did that feel? Like, I remember going through walkthroughs at 8 a.m. and I remember Ozzie Newsome coming down, which wasn't abnormal. Ozzie Newsome was the general manager, and him telling me to hang back and talk to him real quick. And I was like, "Okay." And he was like, "You know what, Sapp? You've done everything we've asked you to do. You've done nothing wrong. In fact, you've exceeded our expectations, but we're gonna have to release you." And I remember him telling me that after he said all that and being so confused. I was a young kid. I was 22 years old, and I remember thinking, but what did I do? What did I do wrong though? And so basically, he was like, "You got to go sign your release papers, and hopefully we'll sign you again in a week, but if not, good luck." So I remember going up to the player personnel guy, and he was crying, which is crazy. Phil Savage, he was the GM for the Browns for a while, but he was crying when I walked in, and I was like, "Hey Phil, like I gotta sign my papers," and he was crying. He don't, and then he turned around. He didn't want me to see him crying, and I was like, "Are you okay?" And I remember him saying, "It's just not right," which is interesting. I, I was I was thinking, man, I had no clue what was happening behind the scenes, because it was a big blowout argument about why they wanted to release me and not my backup, basically. Um, so he ended up giving me a hug and telling me good luck, sign my papers. My coach didn't even know that they released me, my position coach, because he was like, "Hey, Sapp, what are you doing? We got meetings." And I was like, "They just released me. Like, what are you talking about?" And he was like looking at me like, "What?" So I remember going home, and it's crazy. It was my wife's first day at work, and also it was our first night in our new house. We just bought a house because we're just coming out of training camp, kind of. And I remember that was the first night. The night before that night was the night before was the first night we slept in the house. The next morning, that day was our first day at the job, and I remember sitting at home thinking, man, this is what it means to be a husband right now. I could call her and ruin her day. But I was like, no, I don't want to take away her happiness. It's her day. I don't want to ruin her day with this news. So I remember that was like the loneliest time of my professional career, sitting at home for, I believe, I don't know, maybe 8 more hours, knowing that this was ended. Like, I'm not a Raven anymore. We'd have to move, and she'd probably had to find a new job, like, and then when I got that call from Coach Dungy, it was like, man, like there is a God, and but so that's what that was. So going to Indianapolis was a totally different experience. It was way stricter, but it taught me how to be a consummate professional. I remember going, when they picked me up from the airport, and obviously that next morning, I stayed in a hotel that night. Next morning, they drove me in. Coach Dungy wanted to see me right away. And he said, "Hey, my office is always open. Anything you ever want to talk about, I'm here," which is totally different from Coach Billick. Coach Billick didn't even talk to guys in the hallway. He just walked right by you, and as if it was strictly a business relationship. And you were just an employee, and he didn't have to talk to you. There was no personal relationship. Coach Dungy was totally different. He wanted to know what was in your life, going on in your life. He wanted to be a voice of reason if you wanted him to be. And also remember signing all my papers with the Colts, going to the bathroom, and Peyton Manning walked in. And I remember thinking, man, Peyton's way bigger than I thought he was. And, Peyton just saying, hey, Ray Lewis and a lot of the guys from the Ravens called me and explain what happened. And I just want to let you know, like, anything you ever need, I'm here too. It's a family here. So if you ever need anything, let me know. Reggie Wayne did the same thing, because obviously Ed Reed and Reggie were college roommates. Um, so it made me feel better. Because for the first time, I didn't know anybody on that team. Because with the Ravens, I had two guys that went to Notre Dame with me that were older guys that kind of big brothered me, so to speak, um, which kind of crippled my professional development because I didn't have to be extroverted when I went out on the town. I was always kind of the little brother to those guys. When I got to Indy, it was a whole new world. I had to learn a whole new defense, a whole new, um, everything was brand new. But it forced me to come out of my shell and be a professional. And the crazy thing is I played in the game that first week that I got there. And I got there on a Wednesday and I played that Sunday. And I don't know if you remember the game, but it was a shootout between the Colts and the Packers, Brett Favre and Peyton Manning. And I think Peyton threw for almost 600 yards and Brett threw for 430 yards and 4 TDs. Peyton threw for 5 TDs. And we ended up winning that game. And I remember for the first time in my professional career, I didn't care what happened in a football game. And I think, meaning I no longer cared Like if I messed up, I no longer cared. Like if I did this exactly right, because the worst thing you could do to me had already been done to me professionally. You cut me, and I'm still here. In my mind, I was like, I'm still here. Like I'm still competing. So I'll be damned if I care if I mess up a little here. I'm just gonna play for the first time, lights out. I'm just not. I'm throw caution to the wind, and that made the hugest difference in my professional career. And I tell young athletes all the time, it sucks, but sometimes it takes the worst thing to happen to you, being cut, to wake you up and say, you know what, this is just a game, and the victory goes to those who play it like a game. And I ended up getting the game ball that game. The first game I played with the Colts, I ended up getting the game ball. I mean, it was one of the funnest games I can ever remember. I was all over the place, and more importantly, having fun. So that experience with the Colts, professionally, obviously from a winning standpoint, we won everything. And I just remember the way we practiced and the way Peyton practiced. It was like this. He was a machine type thing. Like it was, and I used to watch film with Peyton because he's a quarterback. I'm a safety. We read each other, and I was just thinking, man, like how lucky are you to have a brain like that? And it was almost like, man, like you have a photographic memory. Like you can watch this play and catalog it back to 20 plays later and understand what everyone's doing. And he taught me how to watch film too. I mean, it was awesome. Indianapolis was an amazing time in my life, and you know um that really allowed me to be a professional. And then got traded back to Baltimore 2 years later. Um, the preseason 2006, the year the Colts won the Super Bowl, um, they traded me back to Baltimore, and and that was I've spent the last 2 years of my career in Baltimore, and that was a fun time. But I think my time in Indy was probably my funnest time as a professional.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And man, I love your answer. I appreciate all the detail you went into there. That's so cool, that insight.
yeah, yeah. Appreciate
So,
it.
two things that I want to just quickly hit on before we wrap up your football life. One is, as stated, Ed Reed, you've already played against, or I'm sorry, played with, and also Bob Sanders, you crossed paths with while being a member of the Colts.
Yep.
As a safety, playing alongside two guys that were phenomenal. I mean, Ed Reed is, just otherworldly, and Bob played a different style, but still
Yep.
so impactful. Did you learn anything in particular just playing with them, different little nuances? And then, ultimately, I just want to ask about that decision to hang it up after those 2 years.
Sure. That's a lot of people forget about Bob Sanders just because his injury history. But I tell people all the time, and I stand on it. If Bob could have stayed healthy, I think he would have been the greatest safety to ever play in the NFL. Simply because though he was short, he was still a big safety. He was 210 pounds at 5'8". He played like a linebacker, but he ran a 4.3 and he played the deep ball almost as well as Ed Reed too. I mean, his acceleration and his leaping ability. I think he had over a 40-inch vertical, and I just remember, man, if this kid can do everything. So to answer your question, if I remember it correctly, Bob taught me a lot. He taught me once again, man, just play, go out and hit everything. And when the dust settles, we'll make our corrections. Just play as a safety. Because what Ed taught me was how to play smart. I mean, that whole Ravens defense was all mind and intellect, which I love because that's what's missing in training today. I think everyone sets up a gym, and I'm happy for them. I mean, that's needed. Everyone wants to physically train their athlete, right? We'll do a boot camp. We'll do phase one is really big. It's a training, which I think is great. But people forget about the mental side of the game. And that's the side that gets most people. Most people never learn that or never learn to study the game from a mental standpoint. And that's how you last in the game. Because I remember Ray Lewis told me my rookie year, he said everyone comes into this game knowing how to physically play it, but by the time you learn how to mentally play it, you can't physically do it anymore. So the people who can learn to play the game aggressively physically, but masterfully mentally, the soonest are the ones who are typically most successful. So I learned that from Ed Reed. I mean, watching film with him, studying film, studying probability, studying mannerisms. I remember Kelvin Winslow, the tight end for the Browns, used to adjust his gloves every time he was getting the ball. And when he wouldn't get the ball, he wouldn't adjust his gloves. So picking up all those little nuances on film, you know, we learned that. I learned that in Baltimore, specifically with Ed Reed. I mean, we watched film for hours into the night. With Bob, it wasn't so much cerebral. It was just, man, let's just go knock everybody out and we'll figure it out afterwards type thing. But it was kind of learning that happy medium. So playing with both those guys, alongside both those guys, I kind of developed I stayed in my lane in the middle. Like I love to hit, you know, got love to hit, but also love to study the game. And studying the game meant any advantage you can get from film and from your opponent's previous kind of probabilities, that's an advantage, and that's you got to use that advantage. So yeah, that was the biggest thing, man. I mean, learning kind of from both of them, and like I said, if Bob could have stayed healthy, he would have been the greatest safety ever. I mean, I've seen him do things that Ed Reed couldn't do, and obviously vice versa. But he was just a special talent that played the game bigger than what he really was, and he kind of ended up paying the price for it.
Sure. That's so cool. So just the tail end of your football career, how do you ultimately decide to hang it up? Because I'm sure that wasn't easy for you. And then once you do, something that you've written about at LinkedIn, because you have written a few articles out there, but sort of kind of calibrating and figuring out what's next. How do I, set myself up for the next stage of my life? And obviously you're well educated, you're smart. You knew early on that this was just going to be a vessel for you to take these next steps. How did you just sort of, recollect yourself and decide on what to do? Because you could go in literally any direction.
That's a good question, and if my memory serves me right, a lot of concussions. Um, it, I remember thinking I never wanted to be treated like a disposable asset again from the NFL's perspective. When they cut me once, I remember that empty feeling. Even though I was educated, I had a degree at the time, I just remember feeling like this disposable asset, which I was. I mean, athletes are disposable assets. That's just the reality of it. But you don't have to necessarily make them feel that way, though. There's a right and wrong way I felt you could do everything in life. And I told myself, um, actually, when I was cut the first time, that's when I started the application process for Harvard Business School. During that 8 hours I was there alone waiting for my wife to get off work. But I told myself if the NFL ever made me feel that way again, I'd leave and do something that I was preparing my mind and body for, which was the business world, the entrepreneur world. I said I didn't have to take that. And at the time, so after my second stint with the Ravens, I played 2 more years. I remember they didn't sign me back. They didn't sign me back, and Coach Harbaugh, that was his first year coming in. Billick was fired. To his credit, he was very honest with me, which I could appreciate. All athletes want, all people want, for someone else to be very honest with them, especially when it involves their life and their livelihood. So Coach Harbaugh said, "Listen, Jerome, I've watched you because he was a special teams coach, I believe, in Philadelphia. He said I've watched you my whole career, and I wanted to sign you a few times, just because how you played special teams and obviously defense, but specifically special teams." But he said the scouting department wants to go younger. We want to draft a younger guy and bring younger talent in, so we're not going to re-sign you. And I remember thinking, okay, well, I appreciate that. I appreciate you letting me know and being honest with me. And I remember calling my agent when I hung up with Coach Harbaugh and saying, "Hey, thank you for everything, but I'm done. I think I hit my glass ceiling, and I played 5 years, which is longer than longer than most. 5 years is all I ever dreamed of playing when I was 11 or 12 years old. Ironically, I want to play 5 years, 5 or 6 years. And I said, I think it's time for me to move on. So thank you for everything you've done for me, and um, it's time to move on to the next chapter. So at that time, I'd already started an apparel company. Didn't know anything about apparel. I ended up reading books. I remember I had a whole library of books on the rag business, and all I would do is just read on planes and read and read and read. So we ended up creating an apparel company, me and another Notre Dame teammate, out of recycled PET plastics. So which was very new at the time. The only company doing that was Patagonia, making upcycled clothing, basically. So we decided to do it in athletics. So imagine Lululemon, Under Armour, Nike type stuff. That's how it felt. That's how it looked, but it was made from all recycled plastic. So ended up walking right into that, and next thing I knew, our first customer were the Navy SEALs. So they loved it because it was American made. It was made in Mount Gilead, North Carolina. It was all made from recycled plastics. I mean, it was a really cool technology. Literally plastic bottles that were upcycled into polyester yarn. It had wicking, anti-flame retardant on it, which is one of the reasons the Navy SEALs really wanted it. And it was very durable. So that was my new competition in life. As I mentioned earlier, we talk about athletes. All we want to do is compete at something. Genuine athletes. That's why you can never stop being an athlete, because the thing that makes you an athlete is your ability to want to compete. I don't care what it is. So transitioning out of football into the business world was easier for me because I had something to immediately compete in. Um, Even though it didn't fill that void per se completely that football left, it filled the competitive void in me, because now the apparel industry was my competition, and every company in the apparel industry were competitors, and not in some like vicious none of it do whatever, and that kept me mission driven. That was my mission. That was my purpose. So I ended up selling that company, or selling my shares in that company. And how I got to Vegas, ended up writing an algorithm for social influence, um, how to track online social influence, social media influence. So all these Instagram models and Fashion Nova models and YouTube celebrities, the algorithm, that the base fundamental algorithm I wrote was the foundation of that um, industry, social influencer marketing. So Tony Hsieh, the CEO of Zappos.com, started essentially a VC, a venture capital fund in Vegas, and they invested in my company and in my technology, my algorithm. And as a part of the investment requirement, I had to move to Las Vegas. So that's why I'm here in Las Vegas. End up selling that algorithm, that technology, um, and then end up dabbling in. I wanted to get out of technology and end up dabbling in a lot of other things, production, VR, and lastly, meal prep, basically. And at this point, I decided to really just take it easy and focus on my sons and focus on combat veterans too. So, you know,
Yeah, and that's really what I wanted to end with, because what you're doing with MVP, merging vets and players, is really cool. We talked about it off air, but just real quick here as we wrap it up, can you just tell everyone what that's about, and we'll sort of just wrap it up from there.
sure. Well, I think society wants to always pick a good guy and a bad guy. I mean, I think our minds are trained from that, from youth, right? Watching cartoons and you know, um, Speedy Gonzalez, and the Road Runner. There's always a good and a bad guy. And I think with a lot of things in society, it's there's a big misconception, and I think that there's a big misconception between athletes and the military. And this charity, Merging Vets and Players, really does a good job of eliminating these misconceptions. Merging Vets and Players was created by Jay Glazier, who's an NFL analyst, and was that slips my mind now. He was a Green Beret that told Colin Kaepernick to kneel instead of sit for the national anthem. Um, so basically, what merging vets and players does is literally combines athletes, former professional athletes, and combat veterans. It puts them together and allows them to talk about, and it actually allows them to develop new missions in life together. Because as we're talking about off air, people say, well, what do veterans and combat veterans and ex-professional athletes have in common? And the biggest thing is we all used to have missions, and those missions created purpose in our lives. So now when you don't have those missions anymore, whether they be actual missions in combat or our mission to win the Super Bowl, you lose purpose, and then you kind of tailspin in life, and that's when depression sets in and other things. So being able to talk about these disappointments and talk about these voids in your life, talk and develop new ones together, new missions, new purposes, you kind of strengthen a whole kind of generation of these, iron kind of hardened people, and you allow them to live a second life now, and it's really cool to now call these guys brothers of mine, even though we come from different walks of life. In some cases, we always talk about military people and athletes generally come from the same neighborhoods. It's just the military grabbed you where sports grabbed me, basically. But we come from the same places. We've experienced mentally, to some degree, some of the same challenges when we retired from our professional sports. Obviously, I'm not trying to compare what an athlete does to what the military does, or trying to say, what we've done is anything equal to what they've done, because that's not the case at all. Um, but when you don't have camaraderie around you and you don't have a mission anymore, the psychologically as human we experience the same things, and that's what MVP really is helping to combat. Is, hey, let's stop this cycle of depression, let's create new missions, and let's do it together, because we're kind of type A, driven people anyway. So putting us together, that's a match made in heaven in most cases. So that's what merging vets and players does, and it's a charity, it's an organization, and they're really growing fast too. I think we're in 10 cities now. So, yep.
Very cool. Well, Jerome, we always end the podcast with a quick, rapid question segment. We call it the gauntlet. So I just got a couple quick ones for you. What's most important, having the number one offense or number one defense?
Number one offense.
Now, what's most important? Is it the players or is it the scheme?
Oh, that's a good one, man. It's the scheme.
There's no right or wrong answer there. Now, do you have a favorite football memory?
I think running out of the tunnel my rookie year, my first game in the NFL. Um, that's got to be my favorite. I mean, it was a culmination of a life's work to get to this point, and I remember thinking, man, this is what it's like. So, running out of the tunnel for my first NFL game.
Got it. If there was one player or one coach that you never played with, but if you could do it all over again, one that you wish you had the chance to play with, who would it be?
Tom Brady, and a lot of people don't like the Patriots, maybe don't like him, but one thing you have to do is respect him and respect the Patriots for the ability to win consistently over a long period of time. Playing in this game, I know how hard it is to win one game. So to win that many games and that many championships, which means not only can you win, but you can win when you need to win, which is the most important thing. So it had to be Tom Brady.
Got it. A pregame ritual?
Man, napping. I used to take a nap before the game, and just I just needed my nap, even if it's a 20-30 minute nap. So that was a ritual.
All right. And lastly, what's the best piece of advice you could give to a young kid out there, maybe 17, 18 years old, to if they want to make it in the NFL or even just make it to be a good person, productive person in the world?
A lot of people worry about the wrong things, and there's a lot of common denominators, but the biggest thing is tenacity. If you learn to be tenacious in whatever you do, you'll be fine in whatever you do. There's a lot of people who are big, strong, fast. You know, everyone's big, strong, and fast in the NFL, but there's not many tenacious people. When I say tenacious, the ability to understand that this is going to be uncomfortable, and it may be uncomfortable tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, but the ability to keep going until the job is done, until you're finished. That ability to be tenacious is the thing that's that it factor that people talk about, but you can't put your finger on it. And you see it in fighting. There's a lot of guys who have the skills to fight, but you wonder, why does this guy keep winning? You see it with our women's soccer team. They're tenacious as well. So the bit of advice that I give young athletes and young kids is develop an ability to be tenacious. And tenacious doesn't mean necessarily aggressive or mean or anything like that. It means the ability to endure being uncomfortable until the job is done. Being able to be uncomfortable, being uncomfortable. A lot of people can't do that. But to be successful at anything, there's going to be uncomfortable times and uncomfortable moments, and sometimes long periods of uncomfortable moments. But those who can endure those uncomfortable moments the longest until the job is complete, the goal is reached, those are the successful people in life. So I would tell young athletes and young adults, young people, develop that tenacity and you'll be fine.
There you have it. Words of wisdom from Jerome Sapp. Jerome, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. Everyone can find you on Instagram, LinkedIn. Is there anywhere else you'd like them to check you out?
Now that's it. Yeah, that's it. I think you can find me pretty well on those platforms.
Definitely. And I can absolutely vouch, as I did in the beginning, Instagram is worth it.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.